Just before his murder trial was set to begin, a man accused of killing his girlfriend skips town. Now, nearly 10 years after the alleged crime, a team of law enforcement is still searching for him. This is Unsolved. November 2015. Catherine Dyer's friends worried after not hearing from her. When they went to check on her, they were the first to discover the 31-year-old's body. According to previous interviews with KXAN, friends described the level of destruction at the house as horrific. Just days later, a man named Kevin Michael Waguespack called 911, admitting he killed Catherine. Friends say the couple had been dating for several years. They called her kind and generous and say she found the good in her boyfriend, who went by Mike. 2 years passed, and just before Mike was set to stand trial for Catherine's murder, he disappeared. Since then, a team of law enforcement known as the Lone Star Fugitive Taskforce has been searching for him, trying to get one step closer to justice for Catherine Dyer. Joining me now to discuss this case is Sergeant Riley and Detective Dickin, who have both worked on this case extensively. Thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thanks for having us.
Thanks. Talk to me first about when you became involved in this case, Detective Dickin. I know it was very early on in the process.
Yes, I was actually a patrol officer in North Austin in 2015 in November, and around that time there weren't a ton of homicides that happened. That was actually the first homicide that I'd ever responded to as a patrol officer. Was not one of the initial officers there, but I spent a lot of time there over the next probably 24 to 36 hours maintaining crime scene and just letting the detectives for homicide actually work that scene. So I was there from the beginning and continued to pay attention to the case as it moved forward.
What kind of impression did that crime scene make on you as a patrol officer?
It was very, again, it was the first one that I'd been on, so it was very violent from what I could tell. Some of the friends were there, witnesses to the first people that actually went into the house to check on Catherine and discovered her body. So from their account and then just from being there, it was a very violent scene and a true tragedy.
From there, what did we learn about what might have occurred at that scene?
From my understanding, Catherine and Kevin had been in a relationship for several years, and it had been volatile at times. Something obviously had happened that day to cause an argument. I'm not sure of all of the details of what led to it, but something very violent happened after they'd spent a night out on the town in Austin. I believe they'd gone out with friends to dinner, drinks, and then gone back to the house, and then there was some sort of a disagreement that had occurred and escalated into the unfortunate homicide of Catherine.
We know friends we have interviewed over the years here at KXAN, and they obviously played a bit of a crucial role in what we know about the case, at least as the public. You mentioned that the friends had actually found her. What were their statements like at the time, and what kind of role has that played in the investigation? What do we know about their relationship because of the folks who knew them?
From what my understanding is, the friends that actually had discovered her had been friends with both Catherine and Kevin. They'd all, I think, grown up together down in the Houston area. I don't know the specifics of that, but they were all very close. And to my understanding, Kevin had made some phone calls that evening that had prompted them to be concerned, and they went and did a check welfare on Catherine, and that's how they discovered her. Obviously very traumatic for them, having known her forever and also having known Kevin to walk into a scene like that. So since that time, I'm not sure what the relationship is with them, but definitely very traumatic for both of them.
Now we know there was a 911 call involving Kevin where he essentially confessed. Talk about that call.
Shortly after, so I believe probably 12 hours later, he'd gone to Houston area, I believe Katy, Texas, which was where some of his family lives. And there was a 911 call made to APD's dispatch, and he essentially said, I killed Catherine Dyer, gave the address, and that prompted officers to respond to the scene again. Actually, we were already there at that point, but him calling, it led us to realize that he'd actually gone back to Houston where his family is.
From there, we know, of course, he became involved with the court system as the case against him progressed. But that's where some road bumps occurred. Talk about at what point this went from being a traditional investigation, prosecution, and when this really turned sideways.
So it was middle of October 2017. I believe it was a Friday, and we got a notification that that Mike didn't show up for trial. There was a pretrial hearing, and trial was supposed to start the next week. And so that's when I came in, and I didn't have any previous knowledge about this case, so I'm coming in fresh. I just joined the task force a couple weeks before, so new to fugitive investigations and learning all that. And, we expected just, hey, it's a Friday, we've been working hard, made a lot of rest, wind down the week, and then all of a sudden, we have this high priority case. And so I started doing research, learn about the case. At this point, I didn't know that he had fled before, that had led to a standoff in Mississippi, and really just start from the beginning, trying to learn, okay, where is he? What's the circumstances, why he didn't show up, and really just go from there to try and find him.
Talk to me, Sergeant, what is that moment like when you get a call that someone has not shown up to a court hearing they're supposed to be at, especially in a case this high profile, this dramatic, a murder case? What does that feel like?
A lot of pressure. All of a sudden you go from, hey, things are going normally, to, oh, we're behind now, and then trying to catch up, not knowing how far behind you actually are. Trying to learn when was the last time someone saw him, what was he doing, where is he living, working, all these things that you're trying to learn about him, because for hunting fugitives, you need to know everything about their life, because that's typically what people are going to continue doing while they're on the run, but just in a different way. So they're still going to try and, keep connections with family, friends, use those as resources to, help their flight, stay under the radar, okay, I'm gonna go hide out with my friend, or I'm gonna go hide out with my brother, my sister, things like that. So you can just learn their history and try and predict, what they're gonna do in the future. In this case, we learned that he, had been out on bond. He had been on a GPS monitor, but in April, so 5-6 months earlier, had petitioned the judge to remove the GPS monitor, which was granted. And so during that time, there's not much history of where he's been, what he's been doing. And so when we learned this, we didn't really know how far behind we were. Was this a spur of the moment decision that he wasn't going to show up, or was this something that he was planning for a long time and has been preparing for? And so that was a significant challenge that we faced.
Can I ask you, our audience may be wondering, in a case like this, how common is it for someone to have that GPS monitor removed? Is that standard?
I would say for murder cases, I was extremely surprised that it was removed, based on what I knew about it, that he had made the 911 call where he had confessed. I was shocked. For a lower level offense, that happens all the time. It's not something that would surprise me, but for a murder case, I was taken aback.
So you're going back and piecing together those months without any location data. Was there anything you learned about that time that shed light on maybe how he was able to make this escape?
Yeah, he pretty much had free reign to travel. We learned that he had traveled up to the Panhandle region of Texas with family or a girlfriend. He'd also traveled back to his mother's place in Mississippi, where he had originally fled to. So it was difficult. Like, he's moving all over kind of the country essentially, and just opens up a lot of areas that now we have to start investigating. Like, okay, does he have connections? Obviously beyond his mother's place in Mississippi. Where all in the country or world does he have any connection that we need to, try and figure out if we need to look there or not.
Mm. At what point, Detective Dickin, did you come back on this case? Explain for folks how you're involved now.
Oh, once I left patrol, actually I was still on patrol when I received the subpoena for the court case finally, and then I received an additional email basically saying we were no longer going to trial on that, and that's when I started to kind of look into it and found out what happened. That was in 2017. I promoted to detective in 2022 and came to the task force as a detective. At that point, somebody had mentioned the case, and I remembered the name and just kind of decided, like, this, I'm going to start digging into this, and this guy needs to get found, and that's how I've been into it since then.
Talk about what it's like to be that close to a trial in a case like this. As you mentioned, it was 2017. It had already been nearly 2 years after the initial incident and Catherine's death. It's our understanding he left town just days before that was set to begin. Explain what it's like to be working on a case where we know family and friends at the time of Catherine's were so shocked to be so close to coming to a trial and then having something like this happen. I imagine that drives the two of you to work even harder to try and bring some resolution. But what is that like as a law enforcement officer?
It's frustrating. Obviously, everyone's presumed innocent unless proven guilty, and that's what the trial's for. There's a lot of motivation to go out and find this person and hold them accountable, and a lot of work goes into it. And it's tough because life goes on. There's other cases, but at the same time, you remember this family and their life in some ways isn't going on. They're still, waiting for their day in their court for Catherine, for the family. And you really, you want to spend every moment on this case and finding the answers and holding this person accountable. But unfortunately, that's not a reality. And so you have to, be patient and work for a long-term solution. And that, I think, as for me personally, it's very frustrating because you just want to invest everything you can into this to find the answers. And a lot of times you have to reach out to other people to do the work on your behalf, because I can't just pick up and fly across the country and do interviews, and so you have to reach out to other people to do interviews for you. You have to serve legal process, wait for the legal process to come back, to start pouring through the data to find any sort of clue of where to look next, and it just kind of becomes a long-term puzzle.
You mentioned the connections with other law enforcement. This task force, you all are working on cases that could span state lines and be thousands of miles away. Explain the work of the task force. How does it work?
So most cases don't span outside of this Central Texas area, but when it does go to other places in the state or other states or even other countries, through the United States Marshals, we'll send a collateral. So basically send a request to another task force to conduct an interview, conduct surveillance, and then they'll report whatever they find out back to us. And so it's a great resource. I mean, produces great results, but it's also frustrating in that, sometimes when you go into an interview, you don't necessarily, know what you want to ask, but sometimes you don't know exactly what you need to ask until you start talking to the person, and you learn something from that you now are going to ask another question that you may not have originally known.
Leads to a follow-up.
Right. And so not having that firsthand, connection is, frustrating, because you may eventually get that information that they'll report back to you like, hey, this is what this person said. And now you're like, oh man, now I need to ask them this. And you're like, hey, by the way, I know you did a great job on that, but could you go back and ask this? And
a lot of circling back, I
right.
imagine.
And while at the same time they have their own caseload that they're working and that they're responsible for. And luckily, I mean, everyone's great, but it's also adds another layer to it and more time to the investigation, so you can't, get the results as quickly as you want. And I'm not going to speak for Tara, but I know that most of the people in the task force are the type of people that like, hey, let's do this now. Like we're motivated and want to, get to where the person's in custody as quick as possible. And so the time factors can be frustrating.
The process of it
Especially coming into it, like my perspective coming into it many years later and trying to backtrack and see what was done 3 or 4 years ago and then where to go from here. I mean, obviously he's got such a huge jump on us, and so where do I start? What direction do I take it, and how to be most effective? It's super frustrating, but hopefully with patience, as Sergeant Riley said, we'll get there.
And we'll talk more about the task force here in just a moment, but I do want to ask, where does this case stand? To what you can reveal, what do we know right now about this case? And how close do you think you are to bringing that day in court to friends and family of Catherine's?
We're closer than we were a year ago. There are several of us that have spent countless hours working on it, but we still don't have a definitive idea of where he's at. We have some ideas of where we think he is, but there's still a lot of work left to be done, and I'm hoping things like this will prompt people that may have heard or seen something, just the smallest little detail will bring them forward. It may not seem important to them, but it's a very important detail that might lead us to where we need to go.
Is there anything else that you want people who are watching this at home to know about this case or about the work that you do?
I think it's important to note that we'll never stop looking. And whether it's this case or others, we put in the amount of work that every case requires. No one case gets more treatment than another. We do this for, the families of all victims of violent crime, and, the cases that get this amount of attention and this amount of work are the ones that require it. And, it doesn't matter who you are, whether, victim's family or suspect, we put the amount of work in that it takes to find the answers.
Well, thanks to both of you so much for your work on these cases and for coming in to shed some light on how it works. We really appreciate it.
Thanks.
And right after the break, we are going to be sitting down with the U.S. Marshals for a bit of a deeper look at how the task force works. Stick with us. Welcome back, everyone. Joining me now is Deputy U.S. Marshal Brandon Fila. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity, especially to discuss this type of casework here with the Lone Star Fugitive Taskforce.
So talk to me about when you all got involved with this case in particular.
Yeah, originally looking at the archives in the Kevin Waguespack case, we got involved in 2015 when he originally absconded after the murder of his girlfriend, and where we sent a collateral lead to the Gulf Coast Regional Task Force there in Mississippi, where there was a brief standoff with the SWAT team, and Waguespack was taken into custody. That original custody arrest there is where he was extradited back to Travis County, went through those judicial proceedings where then he was released there on bond with a GPS ankle monitor, and then that ankle monitor was removed in 2017. And when he failed to show for that last pretrial hearing before his trial, is when they initiated, or when they also wrote a warrant for that pretrial violation, that bond violation, and that's when we got involved again. So to answer your question, that was back in 2017.
And so talk about the initial absconding. We didn't talk about this as much with the detectives, but this was right after it's believed that he may have committed this murder. So you all have been on this case really early on. Does that put law enforcement on more guard that, hey, maybe this person might be a flight risk throughout the court proceedings or the process?
Well, initially, we always get these types of violent warrants, and such as this case here that was brought to us from the Austin Police Department. We know with the type of offense that's been committed that there's always someone, or that good propensity that this individual is going to flee. And particularly in this one, he fled from Texas all the way to Mississippi. Not only that, but it was more of where they contacted authorities, the family, and said that, he wanted to turn himself in, but that wasn't a peaceful surrender. That was where a tactical team had to come in, surround the residence, and then he eventually came out of that residence and was taken into custody. So again, then when he's released and violates those conditions of release and fails to appear for that trial, that's when okay, this is what we're up against again. And I think that's why with the task force, we were so quick, as well as with Detective Riley and our Deputy U.S. Marshals, where we immediately filed a UFAP in Travis County, and that's for unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. The intent of that paperwork and to file that type of paperwork is when we know someone is going to cross state lines or into international territory. And that really gives us that guidance under federal authority, under Title 18, to pursue that fugitive.
As the detectives mentioned, these are often cases where people have not seen a trial. They've not necessarily had their day in court, and so they've not been convicted, but you all still have reason to believe that they are responsible. How do you balance that when you're doing this work and trying to bring somebody back to face that day in court?
Yeah, with the Marshal Service and that Lone Star Fugitive Taskforce, our responsibility is to execute that warrant. And I think that's the type of luxury that we have in today's environment, where you have the legislative, the executive, and the judicial branches, because our specific job is under the executive branch, where we totally go after and enforce, execute that warrant that is written by some judge, and it's our job to really execute that warrant and return it. And we don't like to return it unexecuted, meaning we didn't find that individual. We like to return it executed, meaning that person is in custody and waiting extradition or awaiting further judicial proceedings there at that original, with that original agency or county or something like that.
We talked a bit about family, known acquaintances with Waguespack in this case. What is that like, trying to connect the dots and put the puzzle together of where is this person?
Yeah, so it becomes a challenge. And I think the best analogy to put together is when you're at the beach and you're a kid and you're building this sandcastle and you've got everything built up, but then the high tide comes while you're asleep and washes everything away. And you couldn't even tell if there's a pattern of life or if somebody had been there, right? So I think that's where we're at. And I think that's why now I feel like we have a good task force officer that is very in the depths of things, to where we can try to resurface and rebuild that castle again, because we have the luxury of having a task force officer that was on this scene 10 years ago as a patrol officer. She remembers it through her memory to really paint that scene, and she has that passion to go after this individual. So I think that's really a good starting point when a case that has been over 10 years old, an individual that fled 8 years ago, that's really a good foundation to start. And that's really why we hope we have some success and we're able to bring justice, especially for the victims involved in this case.
In any case, what are some of the biggest barriers to getting to that conclusion, to finding these people and executing those warrants?
Yeah, the barrier is just, you have to have someone with that detective investigative mindset that can really dig historically. And, because you have to try to find something, because you've already exhausted a lot of resource to where you've interviewed family members, you have interviewed associates, and it didn't really lead us to anything. But I think looking at it now, when you have a family member, such as Michael Waguespack, what they like to call Mike or Mikey, where he's fled, and the family, as close as they were, has never really came out and asked, I think he's missing, right? So you have to wonder, you have to have that curiosity in your mind as to their loved one has not surfaced in 8 years. That brings something to our mind to where is that something we need to start looking into? That really starts to make us, keep an eye on something like that. And hopefully something like that will scratch the surface where it's been stale for 8 years, but really just trying to build that pattern. And we know, what's alarming to us is we know that in early October, days before he failed to show for that hearing, his last hearing before that trial, there were family members that came to Austin and they met in a hotel and had some type of family discussion. We don't know the parameters of that discussion right now, but from that point forward, we don't really have any type of footprint in the sand to really guide us anywhere. And I think that's where we're going to have, where you talk about barriers and things that are in the way, is we're going to have to dig really deep into the life of Michael Waguespack, with the intention that he has fled somewhere across state or international territory. And it's really going to take a lot of hard work. I'm sure it's going to take a tremendous amount of search warrants to dig into any type of evidence, whether it's digital evidence or any type of financial aspects, and really try to build that up to try to track something down.
Are there concerns that people are helping him stay out of the light?
Well, when we adopt cases with a task force, we always believe someone's helping them, because in a lot of times these are crimes that just maybe crimes of passion, where they just suddenly happen. And with their brutally attack or this victim was murdered, he had to have some type of help to get him to where he's at now. I would say he probably wasn't financially successful enough to stow away that much money. What kind of plan did he have? So I'd say at some point, whether it's in the initial stage or it's in the stage where it's at today, we always believe that someone's receiving that type of assistance. And it's our job to dig deep. But like when you say you have those barriers, is we get a tremendous amount of cases on a weekly basis that are homicides right here in Austin or from another state that flee to Austin. So, we're a task force with about 30 personnel, and, we take those immediate cases, but yet we also have those historical cases. And that's where I believe we have a luxury of working with the detectives with the Austin Police Department, that intelligence unit is, they bring a wealth of manpower to our task force, and that hopefully we'll be able to turn some rock that hadn't been turned and bring Michael Waguespack back here to Travis County.
A question a lot of folks may have is, with the great strides in social media, it feels hard for anybody to disappear in this day and age. What role does technology and social media play in these types of searches?
Technology plays a major role in everyday lifestyle. Everything we do is faster in life now, whether it's going through a checkout line or building a new social media handle. Because really, for you and I, of where we reside or what we're doing legally, we have to register with the state. We have to renew that driver's license. We have to go by our true identity. But on that digital platform, you've heard many people get catfished. And to where I believe in this case, this individual could change his name. Maybe he has the same picture but change the name. And that's going to be very hard to locate. But there's ways around that unfortunately we're not able to release. We're not able to show our cards because we want to bring closure to the next victims. So we don't always like to sell our secrets. But it's not an easy process. But hopefully if there's some type of digital footprint, whether it's some type of social media platform or we can eventually lock down a financial institution. We're looking for something like that to really, like I say, build that castle again and bring this individual back to Travis County.
What should people at home know about this case? Are there specific parts of Texas where people should be paying more attention or thinking back to where were they? Is there anything that you think the public could do to be helpful in this case?
I think the public and the viewers that are looking at this segment here with KXAN is to go back and realize and look and say, did you ever have any type of encounter with Michael Kevin Waguespack while he was here in the Austin area? Whether it was before the murder, whether it was after this murder. And any type of information that you can provide us as to what type of hobbies he was in, what type of just pattern of life here in Austin. And then we reach out further into our neighboring state with Louisiana, where he has family there. He had also family there in Mississippi, where he was arrested originally, but also had family there in Houston, Texas. So really, if you're looking at this, I'd say pay attention to the picture, because what you can do and the information that you may think is just little may be able to connect the dots for us and connect those dots to where we have a track to where it can bring him back to justice, to bring closure to this victim's family.
Thank you so much for your time, for your work, and your insight into what this process is like. We so appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Join us next week on KXAN Plus for another episode of Unsolved Central Texas. New episodes air every Thursday at 1. And watch any episode anytime. Just go to KXAN.com or look for the KXAN Plus Originals category on our streaming app. We'll see you next week.